following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
It's kind of crazy, and it just shows you how things move fast. Joe was here, addressed ABNY back in October of 2011, and there's been so much that's gone on since then and so many changes. And I think Joe, since that moment in time to today, has shown tremendous leadership in Congress and representing our city and his constituents in Queens. And he has really proven that he really knows how to get things done, and also I think lays the foundation as we move forward to 2016, what critical role he will be playing in Congress. Joe was first elected in 1998 and is serving his 8th term representing parts of Queens and the Bronx. He's the vice chair of the Democratic Caucus, the 5th highest ranking position in the House Democratic leadership, and as part of the Ways and Means Committee, Joe has focused his efforts in Congress on building strong communities, creating jobs, increasing health care access and housing, protecting seniors' hard-earned benefits, and opening up educational opportunities for working families. Joe has ensured that the issues important to us here in New York have not gone unlooked in the Capitol. In January, Joe was part of the coalition of New York Democrats who urged for and successfully secured the reauthorization of TRIA, which is the Terrorism Insurance Act, and he argued that anything less than making it the first order of business for the 114th Congress would not be good enough. And he definitely kept his word. That was the first piece of legislation voted by Congress when they came back in session in January. And it was so critical for our city because it helps ensure that development can continue, and not just throughout New York, but throughout the whole country. Just last week, Joe, along with his colleague, Representative Kevin Brady, reintroduced bipartisan FIRPTA reform, which is foreign investment in real estate, an effort to open up the door to greater investment and opportunities for the U.S. economy. FIRPTA, much like ABNY, is supported by groups across the industries, including business groups, unions, allied trades, which speak to its importance and relevance. Joe recently shifted his attention to a new cause, one aimed at making it easier for all Americans to save at every stage of life, that he's calling Build Better Savings, Build Better Futures. Joe, we look forward to hearing more about your ambitious plans from you firsthand. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our great friend and United States Congressman Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you kindly. Wow, look at that. My brother Sean must have started that. So. Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for your kind words and for the welcome here this morning. I'd like to say the Rudin family's come a long way from Throgs Neck and St. Benedict's Parish in Throgs Neck. Bill's dad and his uncle played basketball at St. Benedict's CYO. A lot of people don't know that. And they continue. The Rudin family, incredibly generous family, started really in Throgs Neck. Their family home, their homestead, today, and a lot of people don't know this, houses the Volunteer Ambulance Corps in Throgs Neck, New York, donated by the Rudin family to that organization. So the Rudins keep on giving. Started in Throgs Neck and continues to happen. So grateful for your friendship too, Bill. Thanks for the opportunity to speak before ABNY. This is the place to be if you want to talk about ideas. I want to join Bill and all of you in recognizing the loss of Brian Moore. Many of you know that my dad was a 22-year member of the NYPD. My grandfather before him also was a New York City police officer, and Brian Moore really symbolizes in many ways the contribution of Irish America to our city in an oft-times unnoticed fashion. The selflessness and that loss, the waste of that life, and it wasn't a wasted life, but how it ended. That life taken at such a young age, I know has left a mark on all of us, particularly my Chief of Staff, Anne Marie Anzalone, whose son, we believe, was in his class at the Academy. So we thank the men and women in blue who serve us. Sometimes they go unnoticed. Brian had 150 arrests in his first 4 years. He was a very active police officer. And we thank him for his service. He will never be forgotten. Something that may not be known, as I was told, that he grew up on the same block that Eddie Burns grew up on. And young Ed Burns lost his life in much the same way. So we think of both Brian and Ed and all the men and women of our police departments and our fire departments and first responders who do such great work for us New Yorkers. So thank you for that moment of silence. I'm incredibly pleased to be here today and be joined by some of my colleagues, but I first want to thank District Attorney Dick Brown, who's with us here today. Dick is, I think, the finest district attorney, and I can say that now that Donovan has been elected to the Congress, so he won't be so mad at me. And Kathleen Rice won't be mad. She's away anyway, so she can't be here today, but she's now a member of Congress. But Dick Brown, I think, is one of the greatest assets that our city has as a judge, as a former staffer to one of the greatest governors in the history of our country, of our state, I believe, and Hugh Carey, but has done so much for Queens County, kept Queens stable in so many, many ways. So thank Dick for all the years of service, and you continue to serve, so thank you. And to have my good friend and colleague in the state legislature, now serving as Queensborough President, Melinda Katz. Melinda is bright, she is energetic, she has a vision for Queens County that really, if you stay too close, you get infected, so be very careful. She will energize anyone around her that Queens is the place for development. It is the place for growth in New York City in so many, many ways, in tourism, in commerce, in tech development. So thank you, Melinda, for all you're doing, continue to do as well. I'm incredibly excited to be here this morning to talk a little bit about our delegation, and I think it can't go unnoticed. And though he's not here, and he would not go unnoticed if he were here. Chuck Schumer, poised to be the next majority leader of the U.S. Senate. That is remarkable for New York, and we don't have to keep our fingers crossed. We're pretty sure it's going to happen, but it's remarkable to be able to say that New York is on the ascendancy in D.C. Kirsten Gillibrand, the work she's done for child care, for our veterans, particularly women, and women who are serving in the military today. She's quickly becoming a national figure, and again, putting New York's foot forward in the most positive way. And there's a former senator who I think she's probably not here today, but she's probably busy out in New Hampshire or Iowa. We'll maybe talk about her later on if you like. We are very pleased, though, where New York finds itself, I think, in Washington today. When you just think about the fact that many of the key positions in the House of Representatives the ranking members are right from New York. We have Nita Lowey, who's the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee. We have Elliot Engel, who's the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Louis Slaughter from Rochester is the ranking member of the Rules Committee. And Nydia Velasquez, writing from Brooklyn, is the ranking member of the Committee on Small Businesses. Just there alone, it's incredible when you think about the fact that Leader Pelosi has appointed Steve Israel to run the communications of the Democratic Caucus. Yours truly, I'm in the 5th position in House elected leadership in the hope, and thank you to so many here in this room. I wouldn't be where I am today if it were not for you, so I thank you for that, but the opportunities may open in the future for even higher positions, so I thank you for all your help and assistance in that. But we have stalwarts within our caucus as well, and within our Democratic Caucus from New York. Charlie Rangel continues. You can't keep a good man down. He's gone through a lot of events in his life, not the least of which is when he started his service to his country in Korea, and 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. I always remind my kids, they don't hand Bronze Stars out. You have to earn those. Those are not easy to come by, and you don't want to necessarily be in a position to get them. Yet Charlie sacrificed so much and continues to do that. He was a stalwart on the Ways and Means Committee, fighting for health care, fighting to protect our hospitals and our providers, fighting to protect recipients of Medicare and Medicaid here in our country. Carolyn Maloney, who's here with us today, and thank you, Carolyn. Carolyn is the most prolific lawmaker, not only in New York State, New York City, but in the country. She has her hands in so many bills that are brought before the House. But I think particularly want to thank her for her work on the Zadroga Act, the 9/11 Compensation Fund. If it were not for Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney's tenacity, I don't believe that bill would have become law. So thank you, Carolyn. Just reintroduced it, re-upped it, so thank you for your efforts there, Carolyn. I mentioned Jerry Nadler. Jerry Nadler, if the Cross Harbor Tunnel is ever built, when it's built, we won't have to name it the Jerry Nadler Cross Harbor Tunnel because we'll all know who it should be named for, right? So it's irrelevant. But Jerry also finds himself poised to possibly be the next ranking member, if not chair, of the Judiciary Committee. A lot of folks don't realize that as well. Again, New York being poised to advance. Congressman Serrano from the Bronx, we like to think of him as the conscience of the delegation. If the South Bronx is ever going to become sober, and it will, in no small part because of Joe's efforts to make the Bronx a more livable community, and we thank him for that. Greg Meeks, I think is someone who deserves so much credit and hasn't been given the light that he deserves. When our city was hit by Superstorm Sandy, no one was more at the forefront of making sure that New York and the region got the resources it needs than Greg Meeks, and he continues today. We're all moving forward, but a lot of folks are still struggling to get their lives back in order after the Superstorm Sandy. And Greg Meeks, thank you for all you've done for the Rockaways, for Long Island, for Staten Island, and the region. Do I have to repeat my words about Charlie Rangel, or could someone let Charlie Rangel know what I said about him? Thank you, Charlie, for being here. You made my morning. And Yvette Clarke is now on the Energy and Commerce Committee. That is significant for our city and our state to make sure that she's in a position to help our health care providers from the health side of things. But it's an incredibly important position, energy and commerce. Both those words say it all. And she now joins Paul Tonko as well as Elliot Engel on that committee. But that was a team effort. That was not supposed to happen. But that was because of the team effort that was put together by the New York delegation. So I want to thank them all the way here today for helping Yvette advance. And Yvette is going to do a great job. She already is doing a great job on that committee. Grace Meng is now a leader nationally, not just locally and here in New York City or New York State, but a leader in Asian American issues and affairs. And she has also been working with me on helping to make LaGuardia Airport, my adage is, it's never going to be a great neighbor. We're just trying to make it a better neighbor. And we are cooperating, or I should say the Port Authority is cooperating as best they can. So we thank them for all their help. If you don't know this young man yet, and he's not here yet, he may be coming today, Hakeem Jeffries. You have to get to know Hakeem Jeffries. The sky is the limit for Hakeem Jeffries in New York City, New York State. He is an incredible young talent. He is already making a mark on the Judiciary Committee, leading the charge on criminal justice reform as well as civil rights reform. So if you don't know him, please get to know Hakeem Jeffries. I think the world of him. Kathleen Rice, former prosecutor, now finds herself as a legislator. It's a life change. It's a new direction for her. But she's already hit the ground running in Congress. She finds herself on the Homeland Security Committee. It's a critical place for a New Yorker to be, given the nature of us being a target. And knowing what those threats are, assessing those threats, and communicating to all of us as to what we need to be doing to protect ourselves in the future. And I want to make a special note of my good friend who traveled a little bit further today to get here than most, Sean Patrick Maloney. Now, he's one of my closest friends in Congress, and it's not just because his name is Sean Patrick Maloney, although that's obvious that would be a draw. But Sean cares about the Hudson Valley. He cares about his community, his district, but he also cares tremendously about this city. And I want to thank him for all his efforts, all his work. He's on the Transportation Committee as well, and working with Jerry now that when we do get to an infrastructure bill and building in this country again, Sean is going to play a critical role there to make sure that New York City gets its fair share of transit dollars as well as construction dollars for roads, tunnels, and bridges. So thank you, Sean Patrick Maloney, for all you're doing. Please give him a round of applause. I didn't make that setup to have nothing. As Bill had mentioned earlier, we're all working, I think, together in Congress. And certainly if he hadn't mentioned, let me mention it. I have never been in Washington in my 17 years where I've seen our delegation work so well together. Now, it's not to say that we didn't have stars and folks that did great things to New York in the past, but from young and old alike, we're working as a team. And that hasn't always been the case, I have to say. That's because we're friends and we care about each other. And when you have that element, great things can happen. We champion each other's causes. As I mentioned before, Carolyn, one of the biggest issues facing New York, almost singularly, was the 9/11 attack. We all came together at that time, but it wasn't a one-off event. And we needed to have the tenacity of a Carolyn Maloney and a Jerry Nadler and Charlie Rangel and et al. Working together, and Greg Meeks, to ensure that the Zadroga Act was passed. And now we need to make every effort amongst ourselves as well to see it extended, because we need to take care of these folks, those who sacrifice so much. When they need government, this is when government is critical and critically important to their lives. We are in a position to really advance that cause and other causes because we care about each other, we care about each other's issues. I just want to talk to you very briefly about an issue that I'm working on right now, an issue that I think is a crisis in our country, that if it goes unchecked and goes unaddressed, will be, I believe, devastating to us in the future. And that is the lack of saving in the United States and the lack of retirement security here in the United States. Back in the 1970s, we were saving 14% of all earned income. If you fast forward to today, we're saving less than 6% of our total earned income today. If you think back to the 1980s, 80% of all employees in the United States had some kind of a defined benefit plan. If you fast forward to today, less than 18% of American workers have a defined benefit plan, a pension plan, a defined benefit plan to look forward to. I think we have to address this in a holistic approach. It's just not a one here and there. And that's why I want to talk to you about my proposal that I made public 2 weeks ago at the Center for American Progress in Washington. But I think it's critical that I talk to the fathers and mothers in New York City and also around the country as well, talk to people, thought leaders around the country as well on this issue. I like to think of it as a cradle to, not grave, but cradle to retirement plan. And as was mentioned before, it's called Building Better Savings, Building Brighter Futures. And I know that we have a blueprint that, if it's not already available to you, will be available to you at the end of the breakfast. And it starts what I call U.S. accounts. On the birth of a newborn in the United States, his or her parents can open an account in a savings bank. And the federal government will deposit $500 in seed money into that account. The family will have the opportunity to contribute up to $2,000 a year into that account. For those struggling, hardworking Americans, we have available an enhancement of the child tax credit to be matchable up to, depending upon your income level, as well as another vehicle for those who are struggling at the lower rung of the ladder, mirroring the EITC for an additional $500 matchable contribution. That begins the process of making savings easier. Some would suggest making it habitual. And that's what we want to be about in this country. We need to start to create a climate of savings here in the United States. It's critical that we start to do that now. Less than half the households in the United States today have savings accounts. Think of that. Less than half the households in our country have savings accounts. This will ensure that every family has a savings account if we did just this. Upon the age of 18, that child, he or she, could use that money for college. They could use that money to buy a first home. They could use that money to roll into a Roth IRA and continue to save and continue to invest. They can use that money to invest in insurance or some other form of savings and investment. But what's critical is we will have started the process of ingraining in our young people the need to save. The second portion of our plan calls for making permanent the President's My RA accounts. They were launched earlier this year to not as much fanfare as I would have liked, but it's working. And there is a partnership between employer and employee where the employer helps create the account and makes saving easier for people. And the beauty of these accounts is that people can use this money. It's primarily for savings, but they can use it for a rainy day. If they have some unexpected medical catastrophe in their family, or if something like their car breaks down, they would have the ability to use that money without penalty to help pay for those costs and then continue back on the road to saving. We would lower the threshold so that we make it even easier for people to open these accounts. And why these accounts are so important, many people can't afford to start their own IRA. The thresholds are just too high for working Americans. The My RA accounts does away with that, and we would like to see that made permanent. The last portion of our plan would create what is known as save-up accounts. And that is where we'd ask, we would require that every employer in the United States with 10 or more employees who already does not offer a benefit plan, a retirement plan for his or her workers, would be required to set aside 50 cents per hour per employee. And what that will do is create a real pension for people. If that employee did nothing over a 45-year period, which is, by the way, it's universal and it's portable, that employee would have, at a conservative level, $160,000 in his or her retirement account. If they modestly contribute to that account, they would have well over $300,000 in that account or more. If you combine two salaries together, that's over $600,000. With savings, with investment, with that pension, and with Social Security being bound up, a $2.8 trillion trust fund within Social Security. It will be there for many years to come. We have to insure it up, and I think there are ways to do that without addressing it through chain CPI. We can make Social Security strong. We can help start the culture of savings in this country, investment, and have a real pension retirement plan for America's workers. This is a bold, I think, vision and a bold idea, but it's something that Democrats have always been known for. Democrats, and not to get too partisan here, but we created the Social Security system, the New Deal, the Great Society, Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, Pell Grants, the GI Bill, Charlie Rangel. Those are Democratic concepts and ideas, big vision, big ideas. Something that I don't see emulated at all in the House leadership today. It's not about big ideas. It's about roadblocks. It's about going backwards, not going forwards. Is this a big idea? Is it bold? Yes. Is it accomplishable? Yes, if we put our minds to it. If we believe that this is as important an issue as I believe it is, and we put the efforts towards making it a reality, we can accomplish and make great things and do great things, not just for New York City, for New York State, but for our country as well. I think I share some of the concerns that many of my colleagues have of what we've seen happen, and I know Bill mentioned the issue of TRIA. That's one example of this deadline, of these false fiscal cliffs. We saw it when the government was shut down. We see it now with the Highway Trust Fund set to expire at the end of this month. There was a time in Washington where we would have addressed that a year ago or a year and a half ago, with the deadline being a good year, year and a half, maybe 2 years away, Charlie, right? That's no longer the case in Washington. That, I think, is one of the biggest problems we face today, is that everything in Washington comes down to a deadline, and there's no foresight, there's no thinking about the future. I'm not someone who watches Rachel Maddow that often, but you remember those commercials she had where she'd look over her shoulder and she'd say, "You see that?" And she was pointing to the Hoover Dam or some other major structure. She said, our grandfathers built that not for themselves, they built it for us. What are we doing for the next generation? What are we doing thinking about not today, but tomorrow? What are we thinking about not ourselves, but for our children? There's enough going on in the world today, I believe, both man-made and natural and disaster, that the U.S. Congress and the government of the United States should not be putting additional pressure, undue pressure on America. We don't need these fiscal cliffs. We need to work together to make this government work, to make this country work. I want to give you a little positive news as well. I was bolstered a bit when Leader Pelosi and Speaker Boehner were able to work out a compromise on the SGR, Sustainable Growth Fix, or as many of you know, is the Medicare fix. That was not an easy thing to accomplish. Many of my colleagues are actually a little bit depressed now. They no longer have a vehicle to use every year to get other things done. But I think it was good for our providers. It's good for, most importantly, it was good for Medicare recipients that we did that. That is a glimmer of hope that maybe we've turned the corner and are going to start to do some more positive things together. We see it happening in the Senate possibly as well, but we'll see what happens now with Iran and the amendments this week. I do think the American people are looking for a positive agenda. It's something that I want to offer. I think my colleagues do as well in the Democratic Caucus. We're about the future. You may not agree with everything that we've done. I know I get enough grumblings about some of the things we did when we were in the majority. But you can't complain that we didn't do anything. You can't complain and say you had no ideas. We did then, and we do now. That's what's lacking in the majority leadership right now. I mentioned just briefly about the future. I do think that 2016 is going to be a bright year for New York. Chuck Schumer, I believe, will become the next majority leader of the U.S. Senate. That is enormous for us. We're at the table on every issue when that happens. And as I mentioned, there's a woman who's running for the presidency from New York. Yeah. And I'm not name dropping. I'm on page 105 of her book. I got a full paragraph. I thought I'd get another paragraph, but somehow that what I wrote wasn't good enough. I guess it didn't make it to the book. So, but I'm excited about this election. I think for New York, if that were to happen, it would be just tremendous. I believe in her, and I think she's a real person. But I just want to once again thank you for my success in Washington as well. You know, this is an example where it does take a village. In this case, it takes a city to help a kid from Queens achieve so much in a short period of time. There are more mountains to climb, and I'm going to be prepared to climb those mountains because I know I have your support and your backing. So, Bill, once again, thank you for having me here today, and let's move forward.
Joe, thank you very, very much, and looking forward to working with you and your colleagues as we move forward. Thank you.